you mentioned Blind Pig. Let's start there. So 1993, you started Blind
94.
Pig? 94.
We started,
okay.
yeah. I started thinking about opening a brewery in 93 and did it in 94. The first beer was a double IPA, and that was, I took my homebrew recipe and I didn't know how to scale it up. So I called Vince Marsaglia. Vince and his sister Gina owned Pizza Port in San Diego. At the time, they just had their one spot, and I was a customer there. I'd go down there and hang out and just get inspired by what they had done. And so he gave me the recipe for Swami's. He knew I wasn't going to just copy it. Yeah. I used it as a guide to extrapolate my recipe up. And so, first beer we made was a double IPA instead of our regular IPA, with the idea that, well, we make a bigger beer, more hops, basically, in all honesty, cover up any flaws as long as it wasn't contaminated. And but I ended up deciding to age it for a year and continue to dry hop it. So it got multiple dry hops.
Oh, interesting.
And we aged on oak chips, which we can talk about why I used oak chips.
That answers a question I'm going to ask you later.
And it ended up aging for a year, and it was all based on Ballantine IPA. Ballantine, which is an old throwback IPA, really the original IPA in America. They had this reserve version of Ballantine IPA that they would age for an extended time on oak. Turns out, I think the oak barrels were pitched, so you probably didn't get any oak flavor, which at the time I didn't know.
Gotcha.
But still, oak became a part of not only that inaugural ale, which is what we called that first double IPA in 94, but regular Blind Pig IPA got dry hopped with pellets, Cascade, Centennial, eventually the Columbus, and then we would put, and those would be pellets and whole cone, and then we would do bags of oak chips and put them in the tank, and they would get it. So it picked up this kind of tannic quality, and it was a part of the dryness of the beer on the palate.
That makes sense, yeah.
And you would get a little bit in the aroma, but it wasn't enough to be overpowering over the hops.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. That's interesting. I'm glad you said that. Let's go back to double IPA, because you're the inventor of that style, right? Double IPA. You've been.
So they say.
That's what you've been dubbed. So that first beer, you didn't intend for it to be double, or you did?
I did.
You wanted more hops, more alcohol.
Yeah, we
doubled
doubled the hops, raised the malt up. We weren't using sugar. That was all 100%
no dextrose.
Malt, no dextrose. And that was probably mostly based on, I kept reading stuff from Fritz Maytag at Anchor saying, like, we don't use sugar. The English brewers, I think he was referring to English brewers sometimes using sugar in the past, and how he wanted to be all malt. And I was, I was very much inspired and influenced by Fritz and Ken Grossman, and from Sierra, of course. And so I didn't, back then, it was all malt. The finishing gravity was quite a bit higher than what I would do today, so on and so forth.
Would you call it a double IPA then?
I called it a double IPA.
Okay. So you came up with the name too.
We still had, we didn't call it Imperial,
because there's that whole nomenclature is Imperial, meaning...
Which it goes, people say use both, but I always said double because we had doubled the hops.
Gotcha.
So, and it made more sense to me at least, but Imperial works too, and honestly it doesn't really matter to me. But Blind Pig, so, the Blind Pig we talked about earlier from Temecula, that was, what I call the original Blind Pig recipe, and now kind of the more modern version, if you will, is still a lot of the same hops, Chinook, Cascade, Centennial, but we have taken liberties and added in Amarillo. So there's a good amount of Amarillo in it. I think Amarillo is an amazing all-purpose IPA hop, and then it does have just a little bit of Simcoe in it right now as well. And the Simcoe is less relevant in this beer than it is in PLINY, where PLINY it's the main hop. The beer is still 6.25% alcohol. It's not as bitter as it was back in the day, but it has held the same 60 to 65 BUs ever since we started brewing it again in 2004, through Russian River Brewing Company. It's changed a little bit in that it doesn't have any crystal malt in it anymore. That was something that we whittled it down little by little, and then we switched from crystal malt to Munich 30, which is there's not like maybe one or two vendors that have that, but just as a transition. And then eventually, we started testing it without the Munich, the Munich 30, and we liked it just as good. So it still has a little bit of Simpson Best Pale in it, just for body and mouthfeel, and then a little bit of dextrin malt, so Carapils or something similar for body.
I love that Simpson, that English malt.
Yeah,
that's a great one.
I like Simpson as a way to add body and mouthfeel to a beer without like going to like Maris Otter, which gets to be for me personally too bready and too biscuity. Whereas the Simpson Best Pale is just this, it has a fullness to it, but it's really clean.
And that's the one question I was going to ask you, but we answered it earlier. Of MoreBeer has a Blind Pig kit, and I remember brewing that, and there's wood chips in there, and, and then I have the commercial. I'm like, is he really doing that? But you answered my question of why the wood chips are in that recipe.
Yeah, it was based on the original recipe, and we still brew inaugural ale every once in a while. Natalie and I have done it twice on the pilot brewery, which is that original double IPA from Blind Pig that has oak chips on it. But yeah, it was based on kind of this thought I had, Ballantine was aged in oak sometimes, but as I learned later, it was pitched barrels, but still kind of a cool part of the recipe and different from here. And this is definitely classic, dry, crisp, finishes at 2.3 to 2.5 Plato. And I really love IPAs that finish at that range. Anything lower than that to me is too dry.
Too dry, yeah.
Anything higher than that, you're getting a little bit sweet.
Yeah, I have to agree with Mike that love this beer, amazing. Anybody who wants to brew the classic, go to morebeer.com. We've got that recipe. Anybody who wants to brew the modern one, get ready to check out the BYO article.